Fantastic. After you have joined in and heard our intro, I very warm welcome you out of a very warm and friendly skies from Germany, from my end. And we have our special guest today, David Raab, the inventor of the acronym CDP and the founder of the CDP Institute. Welcome, David.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
My co-host Thomas, who serves friendly with the intro, and Marshall with us like usual. And we are very curious in getting a bit more to know on why you founded the CDP Institute and a bit about your background, David, and some differentiations between what we know as databases and data warehouses and all that interesting stuff which drives data-driven whatsoever. Floor is yours.
Okay, well, that's quite a long list of things to cover. Maybe we'll just start with my personal tale, and then we can ask questions after that. So we'll go back to the beginning. I was a marketer back in the day. That's really where I started out. Spent a number of years doing direct marketing. We won't say how many years ago, but back when it was direct mail marketing in magazines and continuities. And then I became a marketing technology consultant, helping other marketers to find the right vendors and tools. And I did that for many, many years. And as part of that, of course, you keep an eye on the technology that's out there so you can give good advice to your clients. And one of the things we saw in 2013 was that there was a new class of system that was showing up that instead of being an analytical tool that connected to a data warehouse that was built separately, these were analytical tools that built their own data warehouse. And that was a new thing because they used to be done by separate things. So it needed a name, and we called it Customer Data Platforms. And then a few years later, in 2016, the category really started to take off, and several of the vendors in the space came to me and said, we want to promote the category, and you've been the person talking about it for all these years, so what can we do? And we founded the CDP Institute, which is a vendor-neutral organization that has the mission of really helping companies to do a better job with their customer data. The people who pay us, who are the vendors, of course, think our job is to sell CDPs, but don't tell them that I said that. Really, we just want people to be successful, because that's, as a consultant, what I've always done. And if they happen to buy a CDP, that's just great. And in many cases, of course, doing a better job with your customer data does require a CDP.
How many CDPs do you count currently?
Actually, we do an industry update every 6 months. And the most recent, which is literally finished almost yesterday, except for the introduction, I believe we ended up with 161 count.
Wow.
Keeps growing.
Quite
yeah. And do you track them with a CDP?
No, I can't afford a CDP. They're really big company tools. So that's what Excel is for.
Two very honest answers. Yeah. So your CDP is excellent.
My CDP is Excel. Well, we have a Word, we have a CMS system, we have a mailing system, and that's where the customer data really sits. Yeah. But for 160 CDPs, I can do that in Excel.
Yeah, you probably don't need a full-fledged CDP for that. So,
yeah.
But you said that the systems got built as additional analytic systems on top of or next to existing analytical systems. Can you explain a little why that came? Because if you already have an analytical system, from an architectural need, and I'm a software architect by origin, there's not a real need to build another one next to it. It's just adding complexity.
It was a very specific gap. I mean, again, there are two ways to look at it. The one is that if you already had a data warehouse or a marketing database or a marketing data warehouse, there were different names for those things, still are, but back in the day it was a more common terminology. And all your customer data was pulled in from different places. That pretty much did what a CDP does. But the problem is very few companies actually had them. And they were by and large custom built. In fact, they were exclusively custom built, which means they were big projects and took a long time and cost a lot of money and often didn't deliver what you expected. So a lot of the CDP vendors' origin stories is, I was working at a company as a marketer, and I asked my IT people to pull together all the data that was sitting in all these different systems, and they tried and failed. And I said to myself, everybody else is having the same problem. Let me go off and build software to solve the problems. So your typical business intelligence system, even today, usually is going to get its data from a data warehouse or a data lake or some other place. Some of them have the ability to go out and collect the data directly from the source systems and to bring it together and cleanse it and unify it and do all that work. But that would be more the exception than the rule. Usually you have your Tableau or your Looker or whatever that reads a database that's assembled by something else. So the CDP is designed specifically to solve that problem, specifically to pull together the data from all the different source systems and then present it in a way that's accessible, not just to the analytical tool itself, if the CDP is providing the analytics, but also to any other system that wants that data. Because there were, even back then, systems like predictive modeling systems or lead scoring systems that were, in fact, pulling data from multiple sources to assemble a database. But they were really just using it for their own purposes. They weren't designed to share the data with any other system that might also want the unified customer profiles. So if you had a bunch of those systems, you might have 5 systems, you'd have 5 different sets of customer profiles that were being assembled just each for its own purpose, which obviously is hugely redundant. And as an architect, you would, of course, find that highly objectionable. So that's kind of what was special about the CDP. It was really the only system that was designed specifically to solve that problem of bringing in data from all different sources, assembling customer profiles, and then sharing it out to any other system.
It wouldn't, just throwing a stone here, wouldn't an MDM system not be able to do the same? Plus adding some governance?
MDM systems sometimes are a part of a CDP system. Classic MDM systems were really about just master data, right? So they were about finding the best address for someone, or the best phone number, or the best form for the SKU label, because a product could have 6 different labels and names and IDs, and you want to find the best one. So what they didn't do is they didn't typically store transaction details, because that's not what you do in MDM. That's not what the MDM was built for. Today, MDM sometimes will actually store that other data as well, but try to get web logs into an MDM system. Again, not built for that, not really built to handle that kind of semi-structured or unstructured data. So where the MDM intersects with the CDPs, the MDMs are very good at identity resolution and the identity data cleansing and all those things, which in fact, some CDPs do, some CDPs don't. We actually don't, in our definition of CDP, say a CDP has to do identity resolution. If you want to go call out to a third-party MDM or a third-party identity management platform, from our perspective, that's just fine. And the reason we treat it that way is because typically identity resolution requires third-party data anyway. You have to have reference data sets. Only a few companies have enough of their own internal data to find everybody who's changed their postal address. You have to go out to the post office and ask to get a new mover file or other different kinds of data like that. So it's almost, even if you built the matching technology and the data cleansing technology inside your CDP, you'd still have to go out to the third-party system, and you had to get the right reference data. So you might as well just say, it's okay to use third-party MDM as well for identity resolution in the CDP.
Friend of the show and friend of the industry, Mitch Lieberman, just made a comment Wonder what you think of that MDM, like CRM, is more often than not a strategy made up of a series of technologies. It's an interesting take. What do you think?
Yeah, I'll go with that. I mean, and you're right. It's a strategy, or it's certainly a set of capabilities that you need. And there are products that do all of it in one place, and there are other companies who string together, as you say, a series of technologies or a series of products that each are good at this thing or that thing or the other thing. We really love labels, but in reality, you have to talk about functionalities. And we'll talk about this later, I have no doubt, about how complicated it is to define what's a CDP. And actually, it's not that complicated, but there's a lot of confusion about it. And the reason that there's so much confusion is that different CDPs have different scopes, different sets of capabilities. What makes it a CDP is that it builds unified customer profiles and shares them. That's pretty much our definition. But many CDPs do a lot more things, and that's where people get confused. I was just listening to a podcast earlier today where someone said, well, ESPs, email service providers are really the new CDP, or the other way around. It's like, well, they send email. And a lot of CDPs that also send email, that's not the core functionality. It's just a functionality. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Do you need to send emails? Yes. Do you need to build unified profiles? Yes. So those are functionalities that you have to make sure you have. Back to your architecture, Thomas. Those are all things that you have to have a box someplace in your architecture that does that. Whether the two of those boxes have the same vendor name on it, very much a separate issue.
Yeah. No, this Interesting. Is pretty much the way we wanted to look into it as well. But let's step a little back. So how was the evolution of CDPs?
Yeah,
Then we are probably coming to the different scopes again, and probably are able to resolve the confusion that most of us actually share.
Well, if we can resolve the confusion here today, then my work will be well done, and I'll take a nice long nap after the fall.
Yep, let's go for it.
So how do you propose to resolve?
Yeah, let's start with what's the evolution of CDP. So we said, okay, so there was a dedicated system to perform identity resolution, basically. So what have been the next steps then, and probably why?
Well, okay. So if you want to look at if you look at the genealogy of CDP, if you will.
Yeah.
As I said, there were several different categories of system that kind of all ended up converging to create the CDP. So you had campaign management systems, that some of which were building their own, and even like email or marketing automation systems that were building a database. Typically a very limited database, so only a few data sources. You had, as I say, predictive modeling systems, particularly in B2B systems that were doing lead scoring. They went out, if you look at the earlier ones, they all went out and they spidered the web to get intent data, to collect it and build up enough data to actually do their predictions. So that was another class of systems. There were some advertising systems, some DMPs, that were also pulling in data, certain kinds of unified customer data. So what was interesting, and this gets back to one of the earlier things you asked about, is that it turned out a lot of the vendors who had built those products, who were really focused on the application side, on the analytical tool, the lead scoring, the campaigning, actually discovered that the unified database they were creating had more value than the application that they were selling, because lots of people had predictive modeling. Not that hard to do predictive modeling, actually. Really hard to build a unified customer database well. So I remember a few conversations earlier in the days where I talked to some of these guys, your value really is here. And some of them eventually came around and decided that was it. And so they kind of repositioned the system. And, oh, by the way, yes, we do predictive modeling. But if you want to use a different predictive modeling tool, that's fine, because the real value we're creating is the data that we're assembling. So that's kind of been the evolution. And then once you, of course, have that core capability of presenting unified customer profiles, you got to do something. You got these developers. How are you going to keep them busy? You could just have them do a better job of building profiles faster, bigger, smarter. But often they add applications because their clients come to them and say, this is great, but it really annoys me because I have to go out and buy a separate campaign manager. Can't you just do that for me? So they end up adding all these applications. So you add up segmentation, and then you add in predictive modeling to make the segmentation better. And then you add in campaign management to use the predictive modeling, and then you add cross-channel orchestration so your campaigns can run in multiple channels. So you end up almost inevitably expanding the scope because that's what your clients are asking you for. They would much rather, in most cases, have one tool that does as many things as possible if you're selling to marketers. And that's the caveat.
Anytime you offer something to a customer, you give them X, they're going to ask for X plus 1.
Of course.
Yeah.
And so the marketers are sitting there saying, golly, I have all these other tools. I have to now integrate my campaign manager with the CDP. Can't you just do that, and then I can get rid of that and save the integration effort? Because integration is always a pain in the neck. Now, the exception to that rule is if you're not selling to a single department that's got a whole bunch of pretty clearly defined needs. If you're selling a sort of an enterprise level tool that's supposed to serve a bunch of departments, so you're sitting in corporate IT, and you have people in marketing who want these unified profiles, and people in service who want them in sales, and even in operations. They say, okay, I'm just going to find a system that builds unified profiles that's going to connect to all those departmental tools, because I'm not going to find one system that does everything for every department. So that's a different path. And those are the companies who pursued that path, who took those developers and had them build a better customer data management tool, not build a better campaign manager or predictive modeling system or whatever. So there are these two fundamental kind of different strategies that the vendors have taken. And even though we classify CDPs into 4 or 5 categories, really at the end of the day, there's really just those two clumps of vendors. There's the guys who just do the data side, and there's the guys who are focusing on departmental application.
You're the fellow who coined the phrase CDP.
I do.
Or the term. It's not a phrase. My bad. I'm an old student of linguistics, so one of my favorite things is figuring out why we call things what we call them. So I just wonder how we got, how we progressed from a database to a data warehouse to, integrated data applications to the hated data lake. How did we navigate, island hop these terms and eventually come to where we are now?
Well, Marshall, as you know, the most important thing in any category is having a 3-letter acronym.
Yeah.
And CDP,
the TLA
CDP was available. There was nothing in marketing that was actually called a CDP. So we had to back into that, and C is for customer, and D, that's probably for data, and P is for platform. So that's why it's called the CDP.
Makes sense. Yeah.
No.
Okay. Well, thanks everybody for coming to our discussion. See you next week.
Now we solved the riddle and we are happy. But very honest, I was taking that road as Marshall as well, and I was asking myself I'm old enough that I was on the shows when Shai Agassi stepped on the floor and on the showroom floor and said, yeah, we have invented a new tool. We have rocket science developed, which is getting us forward, and we have the best solutions, the fastest access to the customer data, and we have built what we call a data warehouse. And I was overwhelmed and impressed. And the next corner, the next show, there was at that time CEO of NCR / Teradata, and getting everybody and say, we are faster, we are better, and we have even a machine to the database, which makes it work. So where's the beef? What is my real value as a stupid customer who just want to get clean, proper data?
Well,
Mitch, I'm not sure if that's a comment on Ralph or a comment on me.
I can data warehouses built in them, but and I do go back that far as well. What happens is these things, they appear when the technology makes them possible. or makes them required. So data warehouses, relational databases really is kind of what made data warehouses possible. And there was a great deal of discussion about the right way to build a data warehouse. And there was a comment here about operational data stores. Okay, so CDP and operational data store. Well, operational data stores were designed to give real-time access to data in data warehouses. That was the architectural role, or is the architectural role even today. I haven't heard the term in a long time, but that's what's going on. And remember, the CDP actually is both the data warehouse and the ODS, just to be technically accurate. And if you really want to be accurate, the CDP is more of a data warehouse than it is an ODS, although every CDP has the equivalent of an ODS. And for those of you who are not quite as old as Ralph and I, an operational data store was the layer on top of the data warehouse that was designed to allow real-time access, because data warehouses were not designed for real-time access. They were designed for analytical processing, a different data structure, whole different way of doing things. The CDP today supports both, and usually you will, very much in the tradition of the old data warehouses, have more than one data structure, one of which is optimized for bulk data storage, and one of which is optimized to give real-time access to that data. And such is life. Things are more complicated. It's nice, one little box on your diagram, but in reality, there's a lot of moving parts inside that box.
Yeah, I guess so. And this is why I keep wondering that I buy now some stuff from a 3-letter company, which is driven by a CDP and is driving not me to madness, but my customers to full delight and happiness. And just in the retail, because in the area of industrial manufacturing, it seems not to be needed, or it's already there, or what other magic is coming, And I look for the benefit, and I look for the easy handling, because I heard a lot of noise that we have data analysts now, data stewards, we have scientific, educated people, which cost a fortune to get that shitty data out of my lakes. So I asked myself honestly, where's the beef in getting all that data to a fantastic altogether now? And is it still truth? Is it the single source of truth now, which everybody was looking for like the Holy Grail? Enlighten me.
Well, your data lake, of course, is just a place the data is dumped.
Okay.
Exactly. It just flows into it. It sits there, usually in more or less its original format. Right? So to make it useful, you have to refine it in some fashion. And that's where your warehouse comes in. It takes the data either out of the data lake as its source, or maybe from the original sources, but then it processes it, does the cleaning, the addendum resolution, all the other things that are required to take that raw data and make it usable by the applications that want to use it. And that's the role that the CDP plays. If you don't have that, then you have your data scientists swimming around in the data lake, and each of them pulling out, whatever little portion of the data is useful to them. And pretty much the next day, they have a different project. They have to dive back in again and pull out some other little data. So there's a lot of custom work going on, as you say, by very expensive people. So the CDP, kind of like a data warehouse, kind of standardizes that process. Says, okay, we know there's a lot of shared work. The different projects require the same thing. So let's do it once. Let's put it all up in a structure that, again, technically looks a lot like a data warehouse. Some differences, because usually data warehouses, at least in the old days, were limited to structured data, and the CDP will deal with unstructured and semi-structured data. But at the end of the day, to do anything with it, it's got to be structured anyhow. It gets back to the ODS comment earlier. So the CDP, again, it's packaged software that builds that. It's the packaged software bit of it that was new, not the idea of unified customer data. That was something that might have been sitting in a data warehouse. But making it easier because it's packaged to build it, and then sharing it and exposing it easily is the other big benefit of the CDP. So you don't have to build custom integrations. You have the standard integrations. So I think there's a fair chunk of beef in that. I think that's a tasty sandwich.
Before I come back to Artie's question, I'm curious, I'm wondering whether or how far CDPs relate to CM systems, custom identity and access management systems.
That is a great question. It's one that they've been separate universes, okay, but they are getting more and more and more connected. Because it used to be, CIM was really just about your employees, and your customer identity resolution, or even your MDM, for example, was really about your customer data. And yeah, they were both identity, but customers over here, employees over there, not that much crossover between the two. But now, because you're dealing often with asking your customers to log into a system, you're asking them to log in exactly the same way an employee would log in. So now, again, beginning to see considerable overlap between the identity management that happens in a CDP and the identity management, the access management that happens in a CIM. As you guys probably know, SAP, which bought Gigya, which is a CIM system, kind of based its CDP, at least in part, on that Gigya technology. Very interesting. The only company I know that really has merged them to that degree, and you can argue exactly how much they merged it, but it hasn't quite dawned on the universe, I don't think, how closely these two are. But I see the two icebergs sort of sailing towards each other, and they are going to hit each other eventually, and maybe they'll melt together and be one bigger iceberg. I'm not sure how that works with icebergs or with CIM systems, but we'll find out. What you don't want to be, of course, is caught between the two.
You don't want to be between, no. Which brings us to Artie's question. You briefly touched onto it as well already, but I did think that custom identity is a good lead into DMP.
Yeah, DMP. Hi, Artie. I work with Artie. DMP has another very interesting approach to the world, right? Because it's also customer data. It's also first-party data to some extent. Now, DMPs were built for a different purpose. Okay, again, that's the key thing about CDPs is they were built to do what CDPs do, which is unified customer profiles. DMPs were built basically to service up advertising audiences. And they were built, basically to manage cookies and to select audiences really quickly. And the way you do that technically is with a big flat file. So you might have a couple thousand columns in that flat file, male, yes or no. Or maybe there's a maybe column now, I don't know, but presumably, yes or no. Do they live in Germany? Yes or no. So you have lots of columns, but it's still basically attributes on an individual. There's no place to put transactions in there. You can't put transactions into a flat file. This comes back to our data warehouse discussion, right? You have to have a separate table that has a one-to-many relationship between one customer and many transactions. Relational database design, no problem at all. Flat file design, now what do I do? Rotate it again. It's kind of getting a little deeper in the technology, but so fundamentally different architectural approach to designing a DMP versus a CDP. The problem is that DMPs were often sold as the place to store all your customer data, to store all your first-party data. More so outside the US than in the US, oddly enough, for whatever reason. But outside the US, in Europe and in Asia as well, we find out people if you looked at what DMPs were promised to do, it was to do exactly what CDPs do. This causes a problem today because the DMPs couldn't do that. They were architecturally incapable. And they failed. And now when you go to sell a CDP to somebody in one of those places, they say, wait, I heard this promise. I heard it from the DMP guys and they failed. Why should I believe you? So you have this additional hurdle to get over of explaining, they're really not the same thing, that we've actually designed it with this problem in mind, and we can therefore solve this problem. It's not an insoluble problem. But if you didn't start out to solve the problem, which DMPs did not, you're never going to do it. So there are some systems where you do both what a DMP does and what a CDP does. But often if you look under the hood, there are literally two databases again, back to our ODS discussion. that are designed for the two different purposes, because you really can't have one system to do both.
Following that thought and thinking that the third party cookie is experiencing its apocalypse, or well, basically is about to die. How will DMPs morph into CDPs?
Well, the third-party cookie is taking longer to die than like the third scene of any opera where they just keep singing. It's like, aren't you dead yet?
Yeah.
Go away.
As long as Internet Explorers are around, it will probably live. But
really, so
more browser vendors are removing handling of third-party cookies in their engines.
Yeah, no, it is slowly dying. But there are people who hope it won't. In fact, there was just some legislation proposed, or where I think if I read what they were saying right, they were kind of like trying to convince Google not to do that. In any event, the death of the third-party cookie does force people to rely more on first-party data, which brings you right back to the CDP. So that's been very good for the CDP. This marketers and advertisers recognizing, I'm going to have to be more first-party data, forces them to do that. The DMP vendors, some have re-engineered their platforms to be capable of doing what a CDP does. But if you have some brand equity, then maybe you do that. We see this again more in Europe than in the US. But if you look at a company like an Adobe or Salesforce that has, a very mature CDP, a DMP that they built or bought, those guys are, do we keep them both alive? Do we transfer one to the other? They're taking some different approaches depending on the company. But they all know that eventually the center of gravity is going to be in the CDP, and the DMP will be just one application. When we build our diagrams, for us, the DMP is just another application, just like marketing automation or email or web personalization or anything else. It's just another system to exchange data with.
Okay, as we can be quite customer driven is good. Audience driven in our sense. Mitch is having a series of good questions right now. So what do you think about it? Is the ML, is the place for machine learning in there, or should it be somewhere else?
Again, it gets back to whether the data is stored in the CDP in a format that's suitable for that. And most machine learning and AI training, if I understand it correctly, still takes place on a flat file. And I may be a little out of date on that, because there's a lot of in-database processing that doesn't require that. But to the extent that you're going to have a third-party AI system, you're usually going to have that system pull it out the data and format in a way that it's going to be comfortable with, and then it'll do all its analytics against that and then give you an answer. Again, some exceptions. I think it's Snowflake, which is the big data store du jour that everyone is so in love with. I think there are tools that can actually do ML and AI processing against the Snowflake data directly. A couple other data stores, Databricks maybe, similar. But by and large, you're probably going to pull the data out. Remember, one of the definitions of CDP, or one of our requirements, which I probably should list, is that it doesn't throw anything away. It keeps all the original detail in the same way a data lake does. All right. Okay. So that data is pretty ugly. Usually it's JSON files or something like that is the most common format, or document files. So you have to do some processing in order to make that happy and to make that usable. So there's usually going to be some additional work to get the data into a more analytical friendly format in the CDP, which is where most of the CDP work will done. And if that data store is something that the AI or the ML can work against, great. Otherwise, you'll probably pull the profiles out of that into yet another data store that works better with AI and ML. That answer the question? That was a definite maybe.
Yeah.
Many things are.
As Mitch asked for the panel, Ralph, you're next.
I wanted to have it from my customer user perspective, that it is included, and so that the learning of the machinery or software is easier or less integration hurdles and huddles, that it is an easy go for the AI to learn, listen, and give some extra value. Because what I, as a user, I'm afraid of, again, we are in the section of smelly data or crude oil, and I have to refine it to get my gasoline, to drive my car, or to get my AI or machine learning mechanisms to make something out of it. And I want to have this easier. I would like to see that, even if it's not yet defined so, that CDP is a helping bit in a software pack, which helps me to get precise, better experience, better journey, better customer value out of the data which I have collected and can then deliver. Smart.
Okay, so this goes back to that scope creep that I was talking about earlier, where the vendors go out and they add functionalities, and actually kind of the first thing that many of these guys added is the AI ML processing.
Okay.
Because for one thing, it's the most broadest application. It's not just for marketers. Other departments also have value for it. Many of these guys, or at least a certain number of, particularly the earlier CDP vendors, started there. Again, they built the database really so they could do the processing, or they could do the predictive analytics, which is a type of processing like that. So it's at least half, I'd have to check my data, of the CDPs do have that integrated to make your customers' lives easier, to address your concern. But it's just not a core thing. You don't need to do that to qualify as a CDP. But again, look, 2/3, actually might even be 75% now, of the companies that we qualify as a CDP, we classify as either a campaign or delivery CDP, which means not only do they build profiles, and not only do they do the analytics that you're just talking about, but they actually run marketing campaigns. And the delivery CDPs even deliver the messages themselves. So again, 2/3 of the vendors in the space actually do have that much broader set of capabilities. So it's not required, but it's actually quite common. In fact, it's the majority.
Marshall.
Me. Well, I think they could probably stand to add some more functionality there. Thinking from the customer point of view, what drives people crazy, and I've run into this, I'm sure we all have, is when your customer record, your own information isn't right, and you try and change it, and either you can't, or you change it and it gets switched back for some reason. Is there a place for functionality that identifies repeated bit flipping like that will flag this as an issue? This particular field has been changed, multiple times in the past quarter. Maybe we should look at it. Or can we add weighting to the source? If a customer says, this is my address, can they lock that in so someone doesn't change it? That's a specific thing to me. I once stopped doing business with a bank because they would not accept my address as what it was.
That's unusual for banks, I must say. So it was probably a good bank to not do business with.
Yeah, they're done.
Banks are pretty careful about that sort of thing for obvious reasons. Well, it's interesting because this relates a little bit to the CIM stuff we're talking about, a little bit to the MDM stuff we're talking about, and a little bit to the privacy stuff that we haven't talked about yet.
Yes.
Because those all have to do with getting customer data and making sure it's right. Now, your MDM system should really be the system that is controlling and making sure that you have the best value for something like your address, for example. But the other place where this comes into play is if you're letting customers access their data with an access request, which is a requirement of many privacy laws now.
Yeah.
You need a way to operationalize, to execute whatever their desires are, right? So if a customer says, use this address for me, you better be, now you're actually legally obligated in many cases to accept that. So that's another area that overlaps with CDPs, those pairs of icebergs that are beginning to collide. The CDP is not an operational system. CDP is not the system of record for data. Some people will debate about that, but at least in my mind, the original source system that collected the data, whether it's the account processing system in the bank or the ticketing system in the airline or the loyalty system in retail, whatever it is, that's the place the data is entered. That's the place the data really needs to be updated and maintained. And the CDP pulls that data in, and it'll pull it in from multiple places, because usually that customer data has many different homes in a given organization. And now you do have to have some kind of reconciliation logic, not unlike MDM logic, that says, okay, we have 3 different versions of this customer's data, which is the best one. And that is in the CDP. That's kind of core CDP processing. And if there's an issue with picking the right one, you should have logic similar to the logic that you would have an MDM system to work on that. But if the customer demands a change, that has to go back out to the original source system. And now it really should, let's say the change is made on the website for this particular account, you have to have a whole bunch of rules that say, well, okay, he changed it on his checking account. Does that mean I changed it on his savings account as well? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Honestly, that really, in a banking system, that has to be handled just right, because you really don't want to be making assumptions about what somebody wanted the address on their account to be. You really have to make it a very explicit customer action, which is a little odd that bank wasn't doing that properly. But in other areas where there's not quite the same degree of rigor required, like retail, for example, it's okay to make that change if you're pretty confident it's the right change. And that, your CDP logic might do that, and then it might have to propagate that change back out. So you made the change in the airline loyalty system. Well, now the system that tracks luggage should have the same change if that's a separate system. And the ticketing system, which is for sure a separate system, the loyalty system wants to do that as well. That gets a little dicier, but that can flow through the CDP. But the CDP shouldn't be the place that stuff is entered. Privacy being the exception. Maybe if your consent management and your profiles are actually being managed in the privacy system as part of the CDP, that is a direct data entry. But that would be that's unusual. And to my mind, again, they're still a little separate. It's one of those additional functions.
Is this nowadays also a function of a CDP that creeped into the scope, propagating corrected data or the golden record out of the system?
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's pretty core to the CDP. It's going to create that unified customer profile and share it out. So that kind of, that kind of implies that. You could argue that it doesn't necessarily mean that it updates the target system. You could argue that I share it out, but the other system doesn't have to store it. And there's some cases we made for that. A web form captured on the website, pushed into the CDP, now circulated back out to other web systems. Yeah, it's usually a CDP thing to do that.
Pushing it while making it available is one thing that usually, in my book, so I'm a German, so I'm not a native English speaker, so that implies a pull. So the thing that we talked about right now is more like a push. So like master data management, basically, that part of the obligation of a master data management for whatever type of master data is to push it out to the other system to say, okay, this is the truth. So
yeah, and the CDP often will not push it out quite that way, but it's often an API call or a pull, into the CDP that pulls it back out. But effectively, that's almost the same thing. So the distinction between push and pull gets a little less rigorous than it might have been when everything was connected by batch files. Back when you had hair there, Tom.
Got another comment about CDPs contrasting the place where actionable golden records are. So what Well, we are already deep in there. So, but should the basic question that I read out of that is, should there be the master data management system be a third iceberg that collides?
They definitely overlap. Again, often in my mind, the CDP would call the MDM for all the heavy-duty identity management stuff, because that's not necessarily part of the CDP. And of course, MDM, as you know,
Yeah.
deals with domains other than customer data. So, they're kind of orthogonal to each other anyhow. Am I talking too much? Does somebody else want to say
No,
something?
no.
No.
You are
While
the
people
less,
are calling this a panel, this
Yeah.
really is
Yeah.
a show to highlight you.
yeah.
So
Okay, just checking.
Yeah.
basically, use us as the stooges,
Yeah,
so you
yeah.
can throw all the
Yeah.
punchlines.
Yes.
That would work fine.
Usually, the less we talk, the better it is. Yes, but talking about icebergs, so now we had three possibly. Which other ones do you see? Because I easily could see whatever we have as marketing automation systems right now, most email blast systems, even journey orchestration systems. So, in how far?
Well, again, there's this discussion about what's the proper scope of the CDP, and my feeling is a CDP is a set of functionalities that has to do with building shareable customer profiles, and you want to tack other functionalities into the same system because you want to buy them from one vendor and have them tightly integrated out of the box. That's just great. But I would not be prescriptive and say, the ideal CDP has these other functionalities, because some people want that. Other people don't. They have their own system for that. They have a preferred, best of breed tool for that. There's lots of reasons that you might or might not want that. And again, the beautiful thing about 160 CDPs is whatever particular combination of features you want, there's probably 4 CDPs that will sell that to you. Or you can buy more and just not use the ones you don't want.
Okay, here we got a pretty prescriptive one of our friends, Sven. So, what do you say to that statement?
CDP of the future is data-driven, holistic enterprise CDP. Everything else is more of a marketing tool or something else than a CDP.
It's probably more than 5 cents.
But thank you for adjusting for inflation, Sven.
Right. Well,
Good job.
Again, I don't think there's any one right way to do it. If it's going to be an enterprise-wide tool that's shared, where the profiles are shared across many different departments, then you really probably just want to limit the functionality to the profile management. If it's going to be a marketing department tool, then you probably want as many functionalities as you can cram in there that marketers are going to use to save yourself the grief of having to manage multiple tools. And there are CDPs that do
More.
Customer success or customer service departments. They're not just for marketing, even if it's departmental CDP.
Yeah.
So that's also something to bear in mind. I'm in favor of true CDP being a corporate transformation enabler. That certainly has been one of the reasons that CDPs have succeeded, particularly in the last couple of years, as people do digital transformation projects. They quickly recognize the need for this good unified customer data to support all kinds of things, to support those transformations. And that's one of the things that has kept the industry actually growing quite nicely during the pandemic.
Which leads me to a bugbear of mine. Bugbear, not beer. Bear.
Keep the bugs out of your
Beer would be good as well.
Yeah, but not with bugs in it.
Yeah, so one of the CDP is a system that is deeply ingrained into any system architecture, system landscape, which makes it fairly difficult to create a business case for it. So these days, and increasingly after the craze of growth that we had in the past decade, there's a CFO sitting in the decision board, and the CFO tells me, okay, so now I give you a considerable amount of money to implement this thing. What's the benefit that I get out of this that I need to explain my shareholders basically, or my owners. So how to create and establish a prospective ROI of a CDP?
It's a very interesting, it's a great question, and certainly one that comes up a lot. And there's a couple of answers to it.
Good.
And it really depends on what you can get away with. The simplest answer, the first one you try is, it's a foundational technology. What's the ROI on your phone system? It's just the cost of, or your accounting. It's just the cost of doing business. Can't be in business. Now, if that flies, good, take the afternoon off. If that one doesn't fly,
take the afternoon off. I take this. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Well, if that one doesn't fly, which sadly it often doesn't, you can say, well, there's going to be cost savings. We're going to replace this functionality in our data warehouse. We're going to save this much effort in pulling individual lists for individual campaigns. I can do those calculations. And in fact, the CDP will simply automate processes that are manual now, and that will pay. That will have an ROI, and that will pay for it. And if you can get away with that one, again, great. Maybe it's mid-afternoon now, so all you can do is take a nap, but whatever, you still saved yourself a little bit of work. If that one doesn't fly, because you don't really know that in advance, which is always a challenge, these things, then you say, well, no, we're going to have more revenue. We're going to have better, higher retention rates. We're going to have all these marketing or business value benefits, which is where most of the benefit comes from. The people who do these analysis, you can look at like the Forrester Total Economic Impact reports, and there's at least a half dozen CDP vendors have those. And you look at where they actually, attribute value to the CDP. Cost savings usually will cover the CDP, but the bulk of the savings, like 70%, 80% of the expected value of the CDP comes in higher revenue. We're going to run more programs. We're going to get higher response rates. We're going to have higher retention rates. We're going to have all these great, better business results. Now, that's the true value. Okay, cost savings is nice, but the real value is you're going to do a better job running your business because your marketers are going to be more productive and your other staff people are going to be more productive. They're going to be able to run more finely segmented and more finely targeted programs. They're going to be able to do better personalization. They really are going to get better business results. Better customer data will get you better business results. Absolutely no question about that. A little harder to prove because it's all speculative until you put it in place. But you can run tests if you have to. It's not impossible to prove in a pilot sort of a way. So you have those kind of three levels of answer to the question. And, you have to go with whatever one is going to get you the investment.
So, okay. We can react to Sven and what he said.
I didn't see it.
If you want.
CDP to customer value at the moment of time. CDP to understand topic of a customer and the stage of the topic. Yes, and real time is actually really important. And we used to have 5 things that we said were required for CDP. Any data source, all detail, long-term retention, can't say permanent because of legal reasons, customer profiles, and sharing with any other system. We added real time as number 6, which was a problem because we ran out of fingers. But what can you do? You're not going to grow another finger. Because real time reaction to current context really is so important. You can do so much better job with personalization if you can bring in what's the weather right now where this person is. That really does impact. What's that person's activity? Are they, for telco, are they roaming or are they at home? Very different set of reactions are appropriate depending on where someone is. Are they about to run out of minutes? You can stick them with telco, or do they have plenty of data left in their plan? Those are all critical things to know that the CDP should be able to track from whatever source system it's coming from, and then they should be able to push out in real time to whatever system is currently interacting with the customer to make the best possible treatment for that customer at that moment in that context. So yeah, absolutely, it's super important and very highly valuable.
Something that we have mentioned a couple of times in passing today, but haven't really gotten into, is regulatory changes, specifically things like GDPR, CCPA. How are these going to affect CDPs and the people who use them?
Well, GDPR, the original name of that was the CDP Vendor Full-Time Employment Act. It was like, at least in Europe, obviously where GDPR is most paid attention to. The things you had to do to comply with GDPR were pretty much the same things you had to do to build the CDP. You had to identify all your customer data sources. You had to pull it all together. You had to make it accessible. That's what you do when you build a CDP. So people who were looking to solve the challenge of complying with GDPR were halfway down the path, or 3/4 of the way down the path to buying a CDP anyway, to building a CDP. And they said, well, if I do that through a CDP, it's mostly the same work. Plus, I have a CDP, and I can do all this other cool stuff with those customer profiles that I've now assembled. So it's very much supportive of CDP projects, and I have no doubt there are quite a few CDP projects that were justified, at least in good part, as we're going to have to do this for GDPR compliance anyway, and with all the other rules as well, not just GDPR.
No doubt. And do you want to talk about cost savings? I think the penalty for their first violation of GDPR is 50,000 euros, and it grows from there.
Yeah, well,
just staying out of trouble is a cost.
Yeah, and staying off the front page of the newspaper is the other thing.
Yeah, very well observed. Yeah. Then you better focus on your CX and also on the employee experience, and you get some clues out of how smart your systems are and how beneficial they are for the employees and the customers, such as I agree with Sven that customer experience is important and name of game, and CDP could help us to achieve this easier and in an appropriate way, and we are forward thinkers. And so we are going for get a better customer experience out of true, valid and proper data, which is still my pain point in all that challenge to have the single source of truth, which I was starting with. And I'm very grateful that you mentioned that following GDPR and being compliant helps to create a good CDP as well. Yeah. So one effort, two goals achieved. Cool.
What do you say to that statement, David?
Okay, Sven. Well, absolutely. I mean, yes, it's all about customer value. Totally couldn't agree more. Naughty me for talking about company value. We only want to serve our customers, and revenue is merely a byproduct. But we care about revenue too.
Yeah, well, the revenue, in my statement, is the revenue comes if I'm doing right to the customer.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it really do have to start with customer value, and find a way to deliver customer value, and the CDP, definitely supports that. Couldn't agree more.
I'm happy that still there are a lot of people which are big fans, like I bought his book, Winning on Purpose, Fred Reichelt, on NPS. Yeah, but for me, NPS is too much biased. There is CSAT, there is customer effort scores. There are a lot more in the data generations and getting data out, and find something about employee happiness and customer happiness than NPS. So if CDP is helping me here, I'm a lucky man.
Can't hurt. No, it does
can't hurt. So, but back to the icebergs. So usually systems have, or not systems, companies. I'm totally off the track already. So companies already have a bunch of systems in place. So many of them, for example, sophisticated marketing automation suites. So these suites, or let's add even a journey orchestration system in there, yeah? Or having, well, systems like Qualtrics, Medallia. These systems, all of them, probably have something in place that is already quite similar to what a CDP delivers. Or whether, well, there's a strong overlap. Let's put it like that. If you are now asked what to do in this landscape, whether to beef up in this instance one of these existing systems or put in another system. So where do we add the value in adding another system that basically again introduces capabilities that already have 3 or 4 times, maybe?
All right. Well, I know time is tight here.
Yeah.
You look at what it is you can't do with your existing systems, and will the CDP make that possible? So if the existing systems let you do everything you want to do, there's no point to buying a CDP. You don't buy it for fun. You buy it because there's something that the existing system can't do. So a lot of those marketing automation systems don't bring in external data very well. So if I want to bring in data from my purchasing system, for my e-commerce system, that may or may not be something the marketing automation system really can import, or even from some of my web analytics. So most of those guys are pretty good about that. Yeah. So if I have a gap that the CDP can fill, great. If I don't have a gap, no reason to buy a CDP.
Okay.
All right.
So basically, what gap do I need to fill? So
yeah, that's the question to ask. And if there isn't any, or if the CDP is not the way to do it, because the gap has some other thing that some other kind of system is going to serve.
And just for the record to Sven, who probably meanwhile slowly believes that I'm opposing CDPs, I'm not.
Come across as hostile.
I'm just yanking chains here. Okay, so as we are past the hour, and I'm quite sure you are busy, especially as you hinted that the CDP Institute is a 2 FTE job for one person. Let's not dig too much into your time. Thanks a heap for coming and giving us these great explanations and great information. So really appreciate it.
Thanks for the great questions.
Yeah, thanks for the great questions out of the audience.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, man.
Yeah.
We love it that way.
Yeah.
Vivid, engaging, challenging,
lively.
Lively. Okay. See you soon.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Maybe next time. Bye to the audience and see you next week.
Backstage we go.
Backstage we go.